Publius Virgilius Marin, often nicknamed Virgil, was an ancient Roman poet. His poems have always been read and considered most praiseworthy, linking the founding of Roman culture to the Trojan War, describing one of the most tragic romances ever written, explaining the fundamental source of Roman conflict with Carthage. In this video, you may learn details about one of the books in Virgil's eternal renown epic, the Aeneid. Book 10. Fortune favors the bold. The battle described in the 9th book has not ended. The Trojan encampment survives, but the Latins continue to attack it. In Mount Olympus, Zeus calls a council of all the deities to discuss the war. He explains that it is ordained that the Trojans will live and give birth to the people, the Romans, that will rule the world. As such, for the deities to quarrel over current affairs is fruitless. He makes reference to Carthage, Rome's future great enemy, when he says,
"Then will be time for faction and division, to pick and choose favorites and detested."
Venus replies, insisting that she must be allowed to help her child and grandson, especially as Hera continues to intervene against them. Hera in response argues that it is unfair for the Trojans to take foreign soil and another man's bride. Nonetheless, after both sides have spoken, Zeus insists that all must abstain from interfering and simply let fortune fall where it may. There are some more descriptions of the fighting until Aeneas is finally mentioned. Remember that he was away gathering new allies. Now he sets sail with his new troops. The poet requisitions aid from the muse to catalog the forces he brings. This is similar to the previous catalogs, like Homer's catalog of Grecian ships. I will not mention any of this. Curiously, the Trojan ships that Zeus saved in the 8th book appear. Now they are sea nymphs. They tell Aeneas to accelerate his voyage, and they warn the army to be ready to fight as soon as they arrive. When arriving, the hero uses his shield as a sunlight reflector to communicate with the besieged Trojans. This raises their spirit and threatens to panic the Latin attackers. Therefore, Turnus, the leader of the native Italians, gives his troops a rallying and inspiring speech. His words contain the now immortal lines,
"Fortune favors the bold."
Allow me to mention that although it is bold for Turnus to risk being encircled, it is also audacious for Aeneas to attempt a challenged amphibious landing. He seems like Briseid's disembarking on Pallas. Yes, the Trojan also rallies the courage of his men as he tells them to boldly crash their ships on the enemy shoreline. By the way, Briseid was a Spartan of immortal fame. His deeds are described by Thucydides. Much fighting ensues. The Trojans gain a foothold and eventually advance to relieve the besieged camp. Nonetheless, the Latins do not retire. Rather, they fight a series of Iliad-style single combats. First, descending from his chariot, Turnus challenges Evander's son, a youth named Pallas. You will remember that in Book 8 Evander was the Greek king who allied with Aeneas. In the ensuing combat, lances are thrown. The youth's shot only graces Turnus, but the Latin's shot pierces the youth. Turnus then not only kills Pallas, but also steals some of his apparel. I guess he does this as collecting a trophy. Either way, Aeneas finds this theft very insulting. I would like to note that at least Turnus did not parade the corpse like Achilles did Hector. The next such fight is between Aeneas and a certain Magus. Defeated, Magus begs for his life and the Trojan leader responds.
After Prince Pallas fell, in a single act Turnus broke all decorum and civility of war.
The Trojan also kills another challenger and says,
"Lie there, proud man, unpitied on the plain. Lie there inglorious, and without a tomb, far from thy mother and thy native home, exposed to savage beasts and birds of prey, or thrown for food to monsters of the sea."
I cannot avoid interpreting that the combat is growing even more barbaric, less civilized and crueler. After some more fighting, it becomes clear that the Trojans will triumph. Zeus aims to appease Hera, telling her that the refugees succeeded on their own, without any divine intervention. The queen in turn requests that she be allowed to save Turnus' life. She says that he is a guiltless youth that did not deserve any of this fate. Zeus allows her to intervene, and by her powers, creating an image that seems like Aeneas, she guides the courageous Latin to safety. Turnus is deceived into thinking he is chasing the Trojan hero, but unintentionally ends up on a ship that Hera sets to flow away from the battle. When Turnus realizes what has occurred, he is most distraught. He asks himself the likes of,
What will they say of their deserting ruler? The war was mine until the hardship grew. I led the slaughter, and when it turned, I fled. And from afar their dying groans I spectate.
He wishes to either attempt swimming back to the shoreline or to simply kill himself by his own sword. But Hera detains his heart, and thus he simply floats away. When the Latin troops realize that their king has abandoned them, they are most angry and turn their emotions on the king's brother, Mezentius. Commendably, this one assumes command and, despite lacking troops, continues to fight. Nonetheless, the majority of the Latin force is routed and slaughtered. The poet says of this,
The gods from heaven survey the fatal strife, and mourn the miseries of human life. Above the rest, two goddesses appear. Concerned for each, here Venus, Hera there.
Note that in these lines war, its pains and miseries, is condemned. Mezentius, Turnus' brother, fights with Aeneas. He is defeated and is about to be killed, but his son, Lausus, intervenes.
The pious youth, by love careless of self, entered lifting his sword with only one aim, to protect his father and prevent his death. Shouts of applause run through the field, to see the son the vanquished father shield.
Alas, the boy is wounded. Aeneas is moved by the tragedy of the event and ceases to fight. Unfortunately, since the wound was too deep, Lausus nonetheless dies. Mezentius is also hurt. He gathers his strength and cleans his wounds with water from the Tiber. When his son's corpse is brought to him, he says,
To see my son, and such a son, resign his life, a ransom for preserving mine. And am I then preserved, and art thou lost? How much too dear has that redemption cost? I owe my people that same end. With no resentment I clamor the fate.
Since he is so heartbroken, he decides that he will not flee but die in a last fight. He launches his lance at Aeneas and, jocularly in my mind, the projectile bounces off the hero's shield and wounds a bystander. Either way, Aeneas kills him and thus ends this book. In the next book, the Trojans go on the offensive. In response, the female warrior, Camilla, assumes command of the Latin force. Don't miss it. Now, as always, I gift you an aphorism I crafted as I read this poem.
Since only those who believe they can, the self-deceivers are more successful than the realist.
If you enjoy or gain from my aphorisms, know that I have thousands. I will be writing books with short thematic essays composed out of aphorisms. These essays are profound and intriguing yet easy to read. For very cheap copies, look up Protagoras Pause in the Amazon website. I repeat, Protagoras Pause, that's my name.